On today's show, where do the Capitals' depth pieces fit in?
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, I talk about the depth moves that were made this past summer, or this current summer, shall we say. I think that a lot of us were hoping for some bigger names, but as it turns out, unless you are an extreme hockey fan, most of that Capitals acquisitions made this summer you're probably not too familiar with. What's the latest? I'll talk about that a bit later. I'll talk about Louie Belpedio. Now, listen, I don't expect him to start the season on the big team, but he has a lot of experience in the AHL. What kind of game does he bring to the Capitals and the Hershey Bears? I'll talk about that a bit later. Where does Justin Sourdif fit in? That was the move that was a bit of a head scratcher. The Capitals gave not one. They gave up 2 draft picks for Justin Sourdif. Where does this guy fit in? But just to get it going here, we'll talk about Declan Chisum and giving the Capitals a boost on the blue line. And I think that some of these moves that were made this summer were kind of sneaky, smart moves. Like if you look into the players, you're like, wow, this player does have a really good upside. Maybe not, sexy household names around the NHL, or if you're a casual NHL fan, but some pretty good upside. And I think gives the Capitals some flexibility. And that is what I'm going to be doing this summer, is going into some of these depth moves. I'm highlighting 3 in tonight's episode. I'll also talk about the players that are slated to start the season in Hershey as well. But you take a look at it, starting with Declan Chisum here. One of the things that we know this past season is the Capitals were not prepared for when Marty Fehervary got injured. And they should have done more on the trade deadline. I think that's apparent, but, that's a bit of, looking in the rearview mirror. Monday morning quarterback, woulda, shoulda, coulda, didn't. Can't rewind time. You got to just keep rolling forward. So I think the Capitals made some tactful offseason moves. I'm talking Declan Chisum and also Louie Belpedio. Also, another more of a depth move that will help the Capitals, or the Hershey Bears in that case, on the blue line. But let's dive into Declan Chisum, and ultimately where does he fit in the Capitals master plan. So he's going to be a bit of a depth player. Like I say, he's probably most likely not going to get a jersey night in and night out, but he can step in, and if there's injury or inconsistent play, that is what kind of player they have in him. And I think a pretty good upside, and I'll break down what kind of game that he had last season. So the Caps knew, and we all knew that they needed help on the back end after, watching the defense get overwhelmed in the playoffs, especially with Fehervary out. That left a mark. And, last summer, former GM Brian McClellan made a lot of moves to address holes, if you will, in the roster. And I think that current GM Chris Patrick saw that hole. It was a gaping hole that you couldn't look past, that the Capitals got exposed in the playoffs when Marty Fehervary went out. They tried to plug that hole with Alex Alexiev, and let's just say that didn't work. And in true quiet draft fashion here, the team made a really smart move at the 2025 draft, acquiring Declan Chisum from the Minnesota Wild. And if you're thinking to yourself, who, you're not alone. It was a name that I had heard loosely, but was not super familiar with, shall we say. So I had to do some research, and all things considered, seems like a really good pickup. That I think the Capitals going into the 25-26 season will be prepared, at least in part, for any problems that might arise. Now, he's not a name that'll light up social media, but he is a guy who can step in and play NHL minutes right now. And there's still some questions, ultimately about who is going to be on the blue line relatively. John Carlson in the future and TVR, two players that are going to be entering into contract years of what's their long-term plan. And even if both of those players, are going to be here for the remainder of the 25-26 season, or, the whole season for the Capitals, they need to have that extra player so they don't face this kind of setback that they had last season. But 25 years old, played 66 games with the Wild last season, 2 goals, 10 assists, averaged just under 17 minutes a night. And, looking at the video footage, the thing that pops out is not flashy. He's not going to dazzle you, but was really effective. One of the things that is apparent is he's known for his first pass out of the zone, smart puck moving, and he's got this sneaky edge in transition that I think will be exciting for the Capitals when he's out on the ice. And, when I say depth move, when I say that he might not start the season, starting on the blue line, stranger things have happened. I guess we don't know. Players get injured in the preseason, in preseason games, that I feel more comfortable knowing that he is going to be on the roster in case any problems arise. And, here's a stat I love. Looking into this guy, he led Wild defensemen in 5-on-5 shot attempts, 5-on-5 shot attempt percentage over 51%. That is what you're looking for from a guy that's got a good two-way game, good upside, good defender, but having that two-way aspect is huge. He also had 27 takeaways, which is good. Good for second among Wild D, and chipped in on the power play as well. So they got, like I say, a dynamic player that, wasn't on the radar, I think, of most Capitals fans. Talking about him here as well, Chris Patrick said, quote, having 7 really good D, you've got a really good defenseman that's not happy. So yeah, Chisum may not start every night, but he's going to push for ice time. And with the Capitals' injury history, that's going to come in very handy, unquote. So we know where he's going to fit in. He is ostensibly going to be that guy that's going to be in the cupboard, ready to go. And I say ostensibly because, like I say, we don't know. Maybe he'll have to take on a role right away. But I think that he's best slated as that depth move. But kind of the lay of the land, if you will, with the Capitals' blue line is Carlson, Chychrun, Sandin, Faravari, Roy, and Van Riemsdyk. And add to that mix now Chisum. I think that it is going to be what the doctor ordered for this team as a depth piece. And the thing of it is there were probably better options. And when I say better, I guess what I meant to say is names that are more recognizable. But I think that you didn't want to overspend on a player that is, at the end of the day, going to most likely be a depth move, that you're going to only break him out of the cupboard if injury arises. So, they had Alexiev, a guy that it was going to be his year next year, except that it never was his year for whatever reason, injury or player standing in his way. I feel confident that the Capitals have Declan Chisum on hand, on tap, ready to go if injuries arise. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about Justin Sourdif. Quite a player. The Capitals gave up, count them, 2 draft picks to acquire him. What did Chris Patrick know that the rest of us don't? I'll discuss straight ahead. We've all been there before, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That is where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% with their killer last minute deals. And with things being so expensive nowadays, saving some extra money to see your favorite band or artist is huge. Tired of endless scrolling trying to find the best deal? Game Time's Zone Deals pick the best seats in your section for you. Ever wonder what your view will actually look like before you buy? The app shows you a panoramic seat view, so there are no surprises. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in the second segment here, we're talking about Justin Sourdif. And one of the players that the Capitals traded for here recently, relatively recently, and there was a lot of question about, wait, who? And you gave up, what, 2 draft picks? What's the upside on this guy? And ultimately, where will he fit in? Now, the knee-jerk reaction is just kind of looking at the lay of the land, what kind of player he is. A lot of AHL experience primarily. Where will he fit in on the Capitals? It seems like a really good plug-in on that fourth line with Duhaime and Dowd. But again, just penciled in pencil here and ultimately we'll see where a lot of these players shake out when it comes to training camp. But I think that when you look into what kind of player he is, again, I talked to Locked On Panthers. They gave me the skinny on him. I think that he is going to be a good addition to this team. You know, the one thing that we know about the fourth line with Dowd and Duhaime, and Dowd is the constant on that fourth line, right? No matter what season it is, he's the guy there. So I think that we've seen players that play around Dowd before just really excel, and I think that is going to be the case in Justin Sourdif's case as well. But one of the things that Chris Patrick talked about, it wasn't as easy to acquire him as many people think. So this one's kind of a sneaky big pick here. The Capitals traded for Justin Sourdif right before the draft. Florida sent him to the Caps in exchange for, get this, a 2026 second and a 6th in 2027. Giving up 2 draft picks for a player that is a bit of a head scratcher, or maybe you need to do a Google search on, is interesting. And honestly, it's a gamble that could really pay off for the Capitals. And why, might you say? Well, let's take a deep dive into some of his stats and where he fit in last year. Sortif was drafted 87th overall by the Panthers in 2020, and he's been grinding it out in the AHL in Charlotte. The thing of it is that's, a bit of a question mark for me is he's only played 4 NHL games. Like I say, for a team that gave up 2 draft picks for a guy that only has 4 NHL games under his belt is, a bit interesting. But let me tell you, this guy, I guess is what I'm going to say, has a motor, and he's got a good work ethic and a great hockey IQ. And, the thing that stand out is fearless in the corners as well. And some of it, you just have to look for the video footage, see what kind of player he is. I did that. And all things considered, again, we don't know right now what kind of player he's going to be. We saw what kind of player he was for Charlotte. But how's that going to translate to the Capitals? Now, during the Checkers run to the Calder Cup last season, he had 10 points in 18 playoff games. 4 of those points came in the final. And this is wild. He had 2 game winning goals tied for the team lead. So, a guy that can show up clutch, I like that. And, the high hockey IQ, the work ethic, and, being just fearless in the corner is huge. And, that's what I said. Chris Patrick talked about how there were multiple teams that were all in on Justin Sourdif, if you can believe it. And Chris Patrick said, we've liked him for years, but he was boxed out in Florida. Does that make sense, right? It's hard to crack a lineup when you've got guys like Tkachuk and Brad Marchand ahead of you. So I think that as far as the Panthers organization is concerned, and I think as far as Justin Sourdif and his representation, they probably didn't see a real clear path to the NHL. So why not view him as an asset to move? But here with the Capitals, with Mangiapane and Radish gone, well, there's room. He's probably going to compete with guys Lapierre and Leonard for bottom six roles. Again, loosely sketched here in July, but I could totally see Sortif as a fourth liner with PK responsibility, maybe some second unit PP if things click. That's just kind of guessing and taking a look at things and seeing the deficiencies on the Capitals and where he could potentially plug in. And you know what? A 10-goal, 30-point season isn't out of the question for him. So we're not asking Justin Sourdif to play with Alex Ovechkin on the first line or the second line with Pierre-Luc Dubois. But what are some of the things that we know is the fourth line for the Capitals takes on a bigger role than maybe it does with a different organization. So huge. And if that happens, the 10-goal, 30-point season, then giving up a second rounder looks like a smart bet. Draft picks are one thing, right? And I've talked about that with the Capitals. I also talk about it with the Nationals for another podcast that I do, is that sometimes they take a while to mature. And that's good. The Capitals are building for the future. The Nationals are building for their future as well. But you still need, in the Capitals' case, NHL-ready talent. That's not going to be good, years from now. They want players that are going to be able to hit the ice and contribute in a hurry. Of course, don't get me wrong. It's important to build for the future, and the Capitals have done that. I just understand why it happened. So when you take a look at Justin Sourdif, again, one of the things that you kind of scratch your head on, like, who's this guy? Why did they do it? Sometimes I think it's important to just take a deep breath and understand we don't, necessarily see what Chris Patrick and the amateur guys saw. And I think that, this wasn't Chris Patrick just, just throwing a dart at the wall with different guys that are available and saying, look at guys, I landed on Justin Sourdif. He consulted with the amateur guys. He probably had some phone conversations back and forth with Florida. And that's how these kind of things get facilitated. And, when it's a name that's not recognizable, I think, as fans like Capitals, we entered into with trepidation or, like questioning the judgment. I know I did that. I'm guilty of that as well. But sometimes just understand the process and do some investigating into it like I did for this segment here. I'm not going to say that he is going to revolutionize the Capitals. Don't get me wrong, but I think that he is going to be a really good fit on that fourth line, ostensibly with Dowd and Duhaime. I guess, like I say, time will only tell, but that is where I see him in right now. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about a player that's even a bit more of a depth move. Louie Belpedio, a defender, got a little bit of snarl to his game, but I think will be huge for the Bears or the Capitals if called upon. I'll discuss straight ahead. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. One of the things that surprised me just taking a look at my finances with Monarch Money is how I was spending money wisely in certain areas and maybe not so wisely in others. Now I'm saving for retirement. Good. spending too much money on going out to eat and food delivery, not so good. And the thing that I like about it as well, and if you have a significant other out there, you can relate to this, is building a financial future together. And with Monarch Money, it makes it super easy. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. So in the final segment tonight, I'm talking about a depth player, and even more depth than Chisum and Sortif are is Louie Belpedio. Now a guy that has a lot of history, primarily in the AHL, a defender. You kind of sense the theme here. They're trying to restock the pond. Again, my sketch is he'll start off in Hershey. Again, that's kind of a no-brainer. But, like we've seen other players, if they really excel down in Hershey, they could potentially be good fits on the Capitals if the time calls for it. So to take even a deeper dive into the deeper waters, I bring you Louie Belpedio, and a pretty good upside. Another one of those sneaky moves. We shouldn't be so skeptical here. The Capitals signed Louie Belpedio to a 2-year, two-way deal. He's 29, a bit of a journeyman, and yeah, maybe he's not the sexiest signing, right? But here's the thing for me. Belpedio brings reliability. And oftentimes that is not something that is easily quantifiable. He had 28 points in 66 games with the Lehigh Valley Phantoms last year, led all Phantoms defensemen in assists and plus minus, and also leadership. He was the alternate captain and not afraid to play with bite. As I saw some videos of him getting in scrums or fights there, 88 penalty minutes. He's physical, he blocks shots, he kills penalties, and according to his former coaches, he's evolved into a two-way guy, the kind of player who doesn't flinch when injuries hit. And that's what we're looking for. I don't think the Capitals could have enough defenders in the cupboard. It's funny. And, if you follow the Capitals at all, the story we've heard for the longest time is there's a glut of talent on the blue line. And, that was put to the test. Like I said, when Marty Faravari went down, it was Alexiev. And, it was Dylan McElrath. And, McElrath is a great player, physical player, but by his own admission, not a great skater. And, we hear about Vinny Iorio, or at the time there was Chase Prisky. So, I think that was a bit misleading about the depth. But the one thing the Capitals have done, at least partially, is to help address it. Now, I get it. I said it. Belpedio is I'm 99% sure, unless something crazy happens, he's not going to be on the Capitals to start the season. But good for Hershey. We know that there was a bit of an exodus of players in Chocolate Town, that they had to plug those holes. And that is the crock pot, if you will, for the Capitals organization. And I think Louie Belpedio will endear himself in Hershey. And ultimately, you need players like him, that two-way game that coaches love. And you know what? This guy who's played over, get this, 400 games in the AHL, when the injuries come, and they will, Belpedio will be the next man up. He's been compared to Eric Johnson and how he's matured. Pretty big praise, right? And as Iowa Wild coach Tim Army once said about him about 5 years ago, he's physical, he's making better decision, he sticks up for his teammates. That's a locker room guy. And another, I'm going to go ahead and say it, prototypical Capital or Bear. And, if you're a Bears fan right now, he's going to be an exciting player to watch. That much I know for sure. Like I said, he's not going to crack the opening night roster, but if you told me he plays 20 to 30 games maybe he's playing mix and match. Maybe he gets a call up with the Capitals. Maybe I guess it's not, to say how many games he's going to play here or there is difficult. I expect him to be a constant with the Hershey Bears. And there is the distinct possibility that if injuries or inconsistencies arise, he could get called up to the big team. He's depth, but dependable depth. Go ahead and take your highlighter and highlight that, circle it, bold font. Dependability is huge. And after what we saw last season, the Caps learned they can't get caught short on the back end again. So again, sneaky good moves, I think. Declan Chisum, Justin Sourdif, and Louie Belpedio. Again, oftentimes us as Capitals fans or sports fans in general, you're looking for a name like, aha, I've heard of that guy before. I think that Chisum, Sortif, and Belpedio are going to be excellent additions for either the Capitals or the Hershey Bears. A lot to be excited about. And it's kind of a funny thing to say, as the Capitals and Chris Patrick kind of swung and missed on some of different players, but I'm feeling, oddly confident, I guess I'm going to say. I know it's July going into next season. I'm feeling confident about the youth, and I'm feeling confident about these depth moves that have been made. The Capitals are really good at reclamation projects, historically. That oftentimes these players that were, kind of the misfits on their other teams, I'm thinking, Pierre-Luc Dubois, for example, or Conley, Devontae Smith-Pelly, perhaps, those kind of players that when they come to the Capitals, they find a way and it gels. And I think that is even magnified much more under the tutelage of Spencer Carberry, who seems to be just the right coach for these guys that are considered, I'm going to dub them reclamation projects or looking to take their career to the next level. So depth moves, but depth moves as Capitals fans, I think you should feel confident and, really happy about at the end of the day. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.